Welcome back to Potter's Pockets, episode 009, a discussion on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, chapters either 4 and 5 or 4 through 6. I have it on good evidence from Miss Sarah Miller that I was mistaken that we were actually going through 6, but I'm halfway through it anyway, so if we want to talk about it, I think we can talk about it. So welcome back, Mr. Wes Schantz, and welcome back, Miss Sarah Miller. A lot going on with both of you.
Yeah.
Greetings.
Hey. Howdy.
So it's hard to know who to start with. So Sarah, I suppose, you've been traveling some. So you're like I'm sure you're wishing for the Weasleys' magical flying car right now. Could you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you've been doing and where you're going?
Yeah, sure. Well, the last 10 days or so, I've been packing up my apartment into multiple trunks. And I am moving west to Seattle, where to be closer to my family and
west, of course,
naturally. I decided to make kind of an odyssey of it instead of just the joy of flight that they experience is temporary and I have been on so many airplanes in the last 15 years. Not that I shouldn't be complaining because what a privilege it is to be able to travel by air. But I grew sick and tired of seeing my family by getting on a plane. I mean, that's hard and it's a lot of money and time. And it's one of the many reasons I'm making this jump. And I guess a flying car would be nice, but right now we're in a Chevy Tahoe and I'll be honest, if you put your foot pretty heavily on the gas, it feels like flying. And a lot of my stuff is going to magically fly there in a pod. So, I feel like my method of travel is a lot less crappy than it feels like every wizarding method of travel that we've seen so far. Like none of them look that appealing, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting because it's sort of like how Harry and Ron don't go the conventional route on the Scarlet Snake, even though it's not their intention, and they end up going together as if like the infinite possibilities of all the friendships you can have devolve into the actual friendships you have. That it's like, just as they are now differentiating themselves from the general populace, it's like, so are you doing the same? Not everybody else is going on this journey towards a new school in Hogwarts like you are. This is yours. And so I thought that was sort of interesting. But Wes, you had something fairly significant happen in the last few days or so too.
Yep. I got married here in Spokane.
Woohoo!
And we are very happy. We did a couple days up at the river and the lake, but we're gonna do the big honeymoon in Christmas time instead. So we're back home now.
Can I ask, like, where are you going? Do you know?
We're gonna make a trip down to Uruguay.
Nice.
And we invited some friends from there, but they couldn't make it to the wedding, so we wanted to take the honeymoon to them. So
Nice.
Well, that's wonderful. We're all flying over and spreading good cheer. Well, y'all are all doing good things. And so you're in slightly a different position from, say, Harry and Ron. And I guess just to jump in, there were several things we wanted to talk about, like sort of parallels with Gilderoy Lockhart and Harry Potter and fame and how they perceive fame. And a couple ideas you had, Wes, in the first book about Malfoy being sort of obsessed with Harry Potter and his crew seems to have been borne out by his conversation with Lucius Malfoy, who brings up that Draco does not stop telling him about the exploits of Hermione and of Harry, who he claims everybody loves. So that's certainly not the experience of Harry. But something that really stood out to me in this, that, and again, just because, and I know you're getting tired of hearing this, Wes, I watched Interstellar yesterday, which some people come away with a fairly cerebral view of, and that's why it was recommended to me. But I had a very effective, a very emotional reaction to the story, which I think is actually a more powerful feature of it. And so just to speak about a powerful emotion that we get, that I was feeling alongside the boys today, and I was wondering what thoughts y'all had on was the tremendous guilt and shame that they feel and fear that they will get expelled when they hit that Whomping Willow. And then they get a serious talking to from Snape, McGonagall, Dumbledore, who speaks to them with disappointment, and then later from the Weasley mother, who then says that the father is facing an inquiry and it is all Ron's fault. I just thought that was a tremendous sequence of events, and just just how far they went. Remember Harry's thoughts in the car that, oh, we're going to show up and Fred and George are we're going to land safely and smoothly, and Fred and George are going to be so jealous, and everybody should travel like this. And then they're sweaty, and then they're about to hit the castle, and then there's a Whomping Willow hitting them, and then they're going to be expelled, and they're being yelled at, and they're being spoken to with disappointment, and they've ruined their parents' lives, and they've exposed the wizarding community. It's awful.
It's great though. It's great. I mean, it's the ultimate road trip above the clouds. It makes me think of James and the Giant Peach more so than Interstellar, if you remember when they're up there. But it's like, yeah, it's a magical thing, and it really telegraphs like how horribly it's about to go by its very, majesty up there. It's like, okay, we're headed for a definite crash landing here. There's going to be a fall after this ascent. And I think it's very interesting the way the car is sort of anthropomorphized there at the end. It's
even it's mad at them.
Yeah, it's
even
like
nature. Oh, Wes. Oh, yeah. Sorry just to interrupt you, but it's like it's as if that's trying to describe the feeling of being in trouble as a child. That even nature and technology are angry at you and against you.
Well, and Hedwig. I mean, Hedwig gets.
Oh yeah, of course.
I mean, Hedwig gets like shrieking in terror. And then like I'm fairly certain, I don't think this is giving away anything in the future. Like she doesn't talk to him for like 6 months. Hedwig, like the owl, is pissed.
And then Hermione is not okay with them either, and they refuse to even talk to her in the common room. It really, yeah.
And then
until after the Howler.
They because they got their just desserts. But like they walk in. It is kind of like this interesting parallel with Lockhart, right? Because they do something that's so colossally bad and wrong and dangerous, just on all of the levels, and stupid, right? Like, I mean, they're what, 12, right? Yeah, I mean, like, I remember, like, I think it was McGonagall who said, like, why didn't you send an owl? And they were like, and then we just didn't. We didn't think
that is entirely clear.
That is.
Not think of, in particular, Harry thinking about how good the Weasleys were to him over the summer, and this is how he rewards them, is a specific thought. The Howler, it's like, were you so selfish that, and so, I mean, this is a real question for him to ask. Was he so overcome with the idea of doing something cool and potentially getting some bonus points to his name that he didn't think about the potential consequences to everything and everybody around him, sort of like Lockhart.
Well,
so he doesn't think he's like Lockhart.
But he doesn't.
But maybe.
But like, do you think that their primary motive for taking the car is fame? Because when I read it, I got the sense that their primary motive for taking the car was, oh shit, a fear of the opposite of fame, which is. Well, not the opposite of fame, but like the negative kind of fame, which is like public shame, right? And I wondered if like, because it doesn't seem to me like they don't seem to hate the fact that they walk into the Gryffindor common room and everybody's like uproariously cheering for them.
No, Ron is pretty about it.
Ron seems to like it a little bit more, but like, but I don't think that it's the reason that they take the car. I think they take the car because they're just like, oh man, this is terrible, and like. There were just so, but you're right. Like there are so many things they didn't think about, right? Like,
yeah, Wes.
The way that I thought about it was like, what is the reader not thinking about too?
I was
like,
not thinking about Mrs. Weasley either, though I should have been as a teacher.
Yeah, right. given so many prompts to, you know, constantly to kind of identify with Harry as the protagonist and like the most engaging character in all these ways. But at the same time, it's like that's part of the book's power, I think, is that you so strongly feel for this person who goes through so many crazy adventures, and you're like, oh man, like I should have seen that coming. Like, come on, that was like really obvious. Come on. But I really wish, you know, I had been in Harry Potter's place all the same, right? Like that's kind of the magic of the book. And so for me, it's like, well, it's like obviously he should be connecting the dots here with that powerful and strange little like elf guy who he met back at the Dursleys, but no, you know, it's like also sudden, and so many things are going on that he sort of like jettisoned from
I
our
think
mind
also,
briefly
I
there.
mean, so thinking, I told Alex this before, but like, because we had a little bit of time in between our last recordings, I had nothing else to do besides pack up my life. Was I just kept reading. I had a hard time stopping this book, and so thinking about this episode, this is how they get to Hogwarts in the second installment of the series, and knowing what the villain of the second series is, and the trajectory and the themes, and how is that different from the way that they get to Hogwarts in the first series. Like, so Harry gets in the first book, like Harry gets introduced to Diagon Alley and then to Hogwarts, like through the care and like leadership in a way of like a friendly adult, right? Of Hagrid, right? And at the end of the book, I mean, not to reduce it to something simplistic and like the moral of the story is, but I mean, you could say that like that you know, one of the things that the first book really explores is the difference between reality and appearance, and how people in positions of leadership, people in positions of power can be abusive of that power, or can be, right? And so then in this book, you have an object that you think is on your side, that you think is a tool that you can wield and that you have full control over, when in reality, like the flying car and the Whomping Willow, right? Those are objects that they are not in control of, and they think they are, but they're not, right? They have like
a will of their own.
They have a mind and a will, maybe not a mind, that might be too strong, but certainly like a will of their own, and agency, in the way that like the kids are expelled from the car at the end, and it goes on its own in the forest, and like, and how does that sort of like the way that they get into the truly magical educational world, that is, and also I guess in the first series, that first train ride to Hogwarts is where he first meets his friends. You know, he realizes that he's not the only one burdened by expectation, and like the way that they get to this school seems to prefigure something that they're going to learn later, right? So that like not all objects are under your control, like certain magical objects have wills, right?
So I want to agree with that at a couple levels. The first thing is, I wonder to what extent enchanting something is giving it agency to some degree, or anthropomorphizing it. Certainly there's transfiguration and transformation, but to enchant something, like I think of the Whomping Willow sort of as an enchanted plant. And we do have a couple sort of special plants here, and a suggestion that as we progress into the magical world, things are going to get a little more real for them, a little more dangerous, a little higher stakes. But just what you said about perception, I would hypothesize that that's the major theme of this entire second book: perception and misperception. And I would give as evidence of that exactly how the antagonist attacks those who will be attacked in the future. It's through gaze, it's through a mirror, it's through a misperception. Just to add to that, sort of as a tangent, I found it interesting this time around. I know we're going to talk about this more next time, as much this time. Interesting that the Alexipharmac, or the potion that can heal the potentially fatal wound of the basilisk, will come from a plant that can also kill you if you hear it scream. And so sort of an idea that, you know, equal forces in this world have to be applied against each other, or that, you know, that which is poisonous to one, or is poisonous in one circumstance, is also a healer in another, kind of suggesting the symbolic nature of humans, right? A person in front of you is a friend in one circumstance, but an enemy in another. Like in the Civil War, when your brother one day is now the enemy on the other side the next. And I would say that Gilderoy Lockhart also helps to illustrate this difference in perception and reality, right? He is ultimately not a very talented wizard, but because of how he looks, he's really gotten far in the world and is very famous. And he himself misperceives the fame of Harry and what Harry's relationship to fame is. He thinks that he wants it. And he even misperceives his relationship to other people, right? He's always taking too much. When he talks to Professor Sprout for the first time, he suggests that perhaps he's a better herbologist than her, which is ridiculous because she's, an herbologist, the most prestigious magic college or high school that exists. And then proceeds to take Harry aside with him without having her permission, thinking that would be okay. And she's very much not okay with that. So I definitely agree with you. This is a text about perception and misperception.
I would say that.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say. I think that we could probably see that as a theme, perception of various different things and at different levels throughout the entire series, not just this book. Too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wes?
Absolutely. I just meant so in a physical way.
Yeah.
That, like, it is even more drawn out.
Yeah.
In this particular one. So Wes.
I guess I wanted to go back to the traveling thing and how enchantment brings things closer to human beings in a way. Yeah. So I thought it was cool how the flu powder, they as usual sort of assume that Harry knows what the heck he's doing when he really doesn't at all. And then are so overjoyed when he survives after all and comes back.
I loved that part that they were running, that they actually cared about him. That's an even more unique experience to him than the flu powder. Go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So he has this kind of like accident, which of course turns out to be like very beneficial, where he overhears some inside information, right? And gets to see this other side of Draco around his father.
I would think he would be ashamed to have been beaten on every single test by a Muggleborn. And that's also where we are really shown that sort of first antipathy to Muggles too, right? Lucius brings it up then, and then he says, I thought your family could sink no lower, Arthur, at the bookstore as well. So that was the first time I was noting that. Go on, I'm sorry.
The only thing, I guess the point I'm trying to get to with this is just that the way that this is all constructed is like we're building on things that we've seen before, right? The idea of magical travel and the idea of things that are accidental that turn out for the best. And then we're introducing these new layers upon them in like I think it's kind of like a painterly fashion. I would think about it. Like she sketched out the world in book 1, and now she's laying on some extra stuff, some layers with Lucius, the bigger, badder version of Draco, and so the way that each of these kind of magical situations gain in volume and in depth over the time, I think is akin to the way that you take an ordinary object and you enchant it and you add on this like personality.
As you add the story to an item, sort of like in Aladdin when the genie, and this has been confirmed by the creators, that the genie is the storyteller at the first, suggesting that the great genie that we all share is that which we share through story, which is consciousness. But what he says is, there's much more to this lamp than meets the eye. And what is it that doesn't meet the eye? It's the story of it, which is what gives it its true value. And sort of that's how we tell our young to treat others, right? We say, if you see someone poor, they're not just someone who is low on the dominance hierarchy. They're someone who got there somehow. So you should have some compassion. Or, remember how you got here. Remember who you are. Just go to the Lion King. Remember. And so just put as many ideas in there as possible. But you're right that what makes something valuable isn't simply the physical constituent parts of it, but the experiences that get appended to it. Sort of like how we have trophies to recall to us good moments from the past or threats or obstacles we've overcome. I'm starting, and so, right.
Yeah. But I would
go on. Sorry. No. Yeah.
The thing about the dark arts store that I found really interesting was that it kind of illustrates this, right? Like things in there are enchanted and they're evil, so it's not like this is a wholly good thing. It goes in both
19
directions.
muggles hung
More good,
themselves
but also
on the hang rope.
Yeah. It's and there's an allure to that, right? Like Draco's like fascinated by all this stuff, and his dad
which
keeps
is
telling
good
him not to
advice
touch
on
it.
his father's part, which shows that his father wants to keep him away from these sort of bad influences, which is interesting. Just I meant to tie this to my claim about perception, because one of the first things we see is that Harry's glasses get broken. He's covered in soot. He's on the wrong side of town, a place that if people were to see him there, they would raise their eyebrows. It's a place he doesn't want to be because people will misperceive why he's there, right? And so that's sort of like one of the first things clues we get in the text, that Harry's image or how he is seen is going to get roughed up in this text.
That's
and
cool.
just yeah. Okay, yeah. So I thought that was a better point than the one I was about to make.
No. I was just gonna say that like it's cool to see how in the beginning of stories,
yes,
like the germs of the things that ultimately make them
the first layer,
really, and so to Wes's, I like that idea, Wes, that it's painterly, like there's not drafts, but like I don't know, coats on it or something like that. And just like I think in my book, I have the American one this time, which I'm like, meh.
Welcome down to the plebeian level with us.
I'm on like page 52 and 53 when they're in Borgin and Burke's, but there are like 5 or 6 moments in just in chapter 4 and 5. Well, there are more than 4 or 5, but just on like these 2 pages alone, where there are not just like painterly references or cues to things that happen later in book 2, but into the entire series. So the reference to the Hand of Glory or to the opal necklace that killed 19 people, like those 2 things become significant in book 6, the Half-Blood Prince. And then when Mr. Malfoy says to Mr. Borgin, like, I hope my son will amount to more than a thief or a plunderer. Like, yes. I mean, that is elusive of book 6. And then there are a couple times in just these 2 chapters where spiders or snakes are mentioned.
Yes.
But not in reference.
Even the Hogwarts Express is like a snake.
Yeah. But they're not referenced as they're referenced in simile or metaphoric form, not as actual things, right? Yes. So they're easily dismissed. At least they were to me when I first read them, but they create, like, when you know what you're looking for, they like plant a seed, right? Not unlike, the maturation that the mandrakes have to undergo. Like, right.
Let's
there's something that grows. Yeah.
So another seed that we see, and then perhaps so another seed is Ginny and Harry.
Yes.
Right? That's going to play out not only during this book a little bit, but also during the entire series. And so something we notice is she defends him when the claim is made by, I think it was Malfoy, that Harry loved getting the fame when he was in the bookstore with Gilderoy Lockhart, but nothing could be further from the truth. He doesn't need the books. He has the money, and he doesn't need the grief from Malfoy when Malfoy thinks that he's edging into his fame. But she says he didn't want that. She seems to have some understanding of him, and he notices her. That was something I noticed when he looks down into the sorting after he and Ron get out of trouble, first trouble with the Whomping Willow. He notices Ginny's hair, and it's unmistakable. Like you were saying, Wes, like it seems like everybody would notice that. But what we can notice as analytical readers is he notices that because he knows the specific features and of the Weasleys and is attracted to that sort of thing. because they are close to him. Who knows what another person would see that stood out to him.
Yeah. I think the other
Right.
thing, another thing that's sort of foreshadowed, or at least I think you mentioned it previously, that's introduced in the dark arts shop, but that it's not just the dark arts or that like the darker characters who mention it, is like this emphasis on blood or lineage. Like even Hagrid says, you know, oh, like you know, bad blood. Yeah.
Malfoys.
Yeah, he's like he makes some comment about well, Malfoy was bound to be kind of crappy because look at his blood. Look at his, you know, no Malfoy is worth listening to. Bad blood, that's what it is, you know. Like this idea that where you come from is sort of determinant of your value or worth. I mean, obviously that's not something that I think, but it's not something that I think she wants us to see as like just a law of this universe. It's more
but
like
we do
a
see
prevailing
people falling into that.
Yeah, but it's
like,
a prevailing
were,
assumption.
Yeah. Right. And what's interesting is you see Percy fall into that this year, right?
Yeah.
He feels his father, who is looked down upon by Lucius and looked upon as having a lowly profession because A, he deals with muggles who are scum to a pure blood like Lucius, and B, he makes no money, as we saw in the Gringotts vault. Or, you know, he has several children too to support, which is a big issue. But also the fact that Percy becomes more and more removed from his family and is reading more and more about being a prefect and becoming minister of magic. He does not want to be bound by his father's success. He wants to be much more successful. So it seems as if he's sort of embodying that idea that you suggested there, that he might also have the notion that he wants to disassociate with his family because those around him might believe him to be like sort of a muggle lover or something like that. And I think we'll actually see that borne out throughout the text as well, as he sort of moves further from it or farther from his family and closer to power, as it were. He's sort of getting Slytherin-y with it. Wes, I know we're missing a lot of seeds here, and I kind of want to talk about perception a little bit. Are there any others? I mean, there must be seeds that we've been missing.
Well, I think we're doing kind of what the book is teaching us to do. Like if you read book 1 and then you come to book 2, you're like, you should be on the lookout for like things that are planted early in the story that will probably come back and matter later, right? So, I mean, it's not like you're gonna have to notice everything because, as you point out, that's impossible. Like you have to have a frame, you got to have a kind of lens to look at things through. But if it's informed by your reading of the first book, then it's going to be like you kind of try to pick up on some of this stuff, and then certainly going back later and trying to read it again, you'll sort of see what you missed before and what you now feel like you should have noticed, and I think it's just a kind of a training, a kind of education in how to read this kind of.
And just to add specific evidence to what you say, I would add 3 things. 3 prefigurations. Not only do Harry and Fred and George go out and fly with Quidditch, so does Ron, which will prefigure his admission onto the team eventually. Also, Draco, talking to his father, mentions how great, or his father mentions that he is going to buy him a broomstick, which suggests that perhaps he will be playing some Quidditch soon. And I've already forgot what my third instance. Oh, no. Here it is. This is actually a much more global one. Just like in Borgin and Burke's, Mr. Borgin is sort of dishonest with Lucius, just as Lucius is dishonest with him. They talk about perception, right? It would not look quite right. It would seem rather unseemly if someone were to find me with these specific poisons, and they might imagine that I would be going to use them on muggles, and that would be deeply unseemly. And then Borgin is sort of oily with him, but the moment that Lucius leaves, he restores his frown and shows how he actually feels, sort of like someone sticking out a tongue at somebody afterwards, perhaps a student to a teacher. And so, the notion that this is teaching us how to read into to look for the seeds that will plant or will become the plants, and to see the initial starting points of the patterns is very interesting. What did you think about the few times that she sort of reiterated what happened in the first book? That was something I didn't pay attention to anytime I read, like, the sorting was happened. This is when the 4 houses, these are their names, get sorted. And it's interesting because those recaps are not so much shorter than the initial expositions from the first book, right? But I was just, I'm not even sure exactly what question I'm trying to ask here so much as what is the use of that rhetorical device, or is that an appropriate use of, or is that just sort of trying to show how information works with humans, that we sort of distill it down more and more to show that that we know something better and better, that like how I've just talked for like a whole minute trying to explain something simple, the better I get a grasp of the information and know what I'm talking about, the more succinct I can be.
I think it's, for me, it's like sort of Harry's memories being trotted out for us to, and it's like, this is like that thing, and then he sort of like remembers a little bit, but again, it's sort of stylized, because it's not in first person, and it's not quite the way that memory actually works, right? It's very distilled, very succinct. I think it's helpful. It sort of recalibrates you to know, like, okay, this is where we're at, and this is what these things are, and just gives you the bare minimum for what you need to know.
I sort of
to
think,
go on with the book.
and I know that I mentioned this before our conversation, that I think there's a real difference between these first 2 books, and I would say even the first 3, though definitely the first 2 and the remaining 4 or 5. And there's a difference in tone. There's a difference, I would argue, in gravity. Now our conversations are bringing out some really interesting thematic and elusive threads within the first two Harry Potter books. But I think, like, you take a step back and do a little comparison, and I mean, not only are the pages like astronomically different in quantity, but I think there's something about the exposition that she offers every now and then that maybe allows for the possibility that somebody read book 2 before they read book 1. And as much as, like, given our conversation, we would think, oh, well, that's missing a lot.
No, that's good. That's very good.
I think there's a possibility that I think just because of the arc of the story being so similar, a few chapters at the Dursleys and obstacles leaving them, and then obstacles, and then there's the immersion into Diagon Alley. Now, this book, this second book, he's immersed into the darker side of Diagon Alley, right? And maybe
of fame,
right? And you could say that maybe given his experience of book 1, it makes sense that he now, when he returns to Diagon Alley, because of what he's known through experience, it makes sense that
it changes his experience.
Yeah, it makes sense that where he goes, and that it makes sense that he, not that he can go to the dark side of Diagon Alley with the flue powder, but that, like, if he does land,
it remains for it to be seen.
Yeah, but
he's already covered all the nice things.
But if he lands there, he can figure it out, or like, he's not unready for that. He might not be totally prepared, but he's also been through stuff, so it would make sense that he, like, I think if in the first book that was his first experience of Diagon Alley, that'd be like too much too soon, right? And so this is like the dark side of, like you said, like this book explores the dark side of his fame, the dark side of magical objects, the dark side of friendship, when Hermione goes crazy for breaking rules, and like the 2 boys are like, the 2 boys are like, ooh, I'm not sure I want to do that with you, and she's been so affected by them that so all that is to say, long story long, I think you can see the exposition moments as ways of allowing for people to enter the story without perhaps either remembering or having read all of the first one. And maybe that's just so, that seems so commercial, honestly.
No, but that's excellent, because she had only been a commercial success for one book at that point. And so
Right.
the position in which she's writing the second book is a very different position from the fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh.
Right.
Like, part of, I think, what you're saying there with them being different is, by that time she'd made it and she knew people would read really long and in-depth books, potentially with some darker elements. It's as if the fan base is sort of growing along with her as she's writing, because I think you're exactly right. At this point, this could have been a 2-book series, even if she had a plan for 7, depending on how well it did.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear from the way that she lays Easter eggs that she knew what book 7 was going to entail, right? She knew at least like big pieces of it. And she said that in interviews in the past, but you're right. Like, I don't even know how commercially successful book 1 was. Like, and where it was commercially successful. I have no background in that, in like the history of it, but I'm pretty sure from like my fuzzy memory of reading these when I was a kid, I'm pretty sure that by the time I got around to reading book 1, we didn't have to wait for book 2. Like, in the same way that we had to wait for book 4 and book 5 and book 6 and book 7.
Right. Well, there certainly wasn't the same swarm about buying 1.
Right.
Or even 2 as there was around. I mean, it was not the phenomenon that it would become.
Right.
At this point, it was still kind of like Wes has been suggesting. Not only is the book and its text itself patterned in this way, but the phenomenon that the text becomes is patterned in this way. Mm-hmm. It has the early sign, or even like Harry's life. It's got the early signs of being great, and it's hitting all the bases, but it's not yet there. It's kind of like what Franz de Waal says about the morality of chimpanzees. They have the elements of morality, but not morality itself. And so they're just not quite there. Yeah. Oh, wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. Wes. Yes.
Did you want to look at something particular about the perspective thing that you're bringing up? The imagery of looking and seeing.
Just to connect a few images, just to do some Jungian amplification here. The first thing is that Harry's glasses get knocked off his face as he goes to this nocturne alley. And so think about nocturne. You've gotten knocked off the path and you've taken a wrong turn. That's the idea. He's misspoken, and that's why he got there. And now he's sort of not ready to see what's there, right? He's right at the edge because he can't quite see it clearly. And he also finds himself in a sort of regressive position where he is now putting himself back into a small closet space. So he's set just like where he's come from the Dursleys' home. And then, so just to connect that with a couple things, we encounter this character, Gilderoy Lockhart, who is perceived as great. 5-time great smile for the Daily Prophet, or most charming smile, excuse me, I shouldn't get it wrong. And he shows all his teeth at the same point, which is interesting because that expression can mean 2 things, right? That he has beautiful teeth, but then we say showing your teeth is like an aggressive sort of thing. And of course, his image is on every single one of his books. And something he fails to seemingly perceive is that his books are expensive for families that have 5 kids that need to buy like all 35 books that they're going to need to buy by him. And then the next thing being that the actions of Lucius, his name means light, which is interesting because his son's name means snake. And so you see 2 aspects of the devil in that family: the light bringer, Lucifer, Lucius, as well as Draco, the snake that tempts Eve. And those concepts are often joined together, though not by all people. But I would argue that they do go together very well. And also the idea of the snake eating the sun, which is the idea of Apollo versus Python. And so you have an interesting father-son relationship with Draco and Lucius, which I'm very interested to get into at some point. But so Gilderoy Lockhart will be covered in awards, and sort of like a contemporary scholar of philosophy who is perhaps perceived as being the wisest person in the world because of all their mentions in magazines and stuff. perhaps can only confound, like Lucius will show. But also just a couple other things. The actual antagonist, or not the actual antagonist, but the vehicle of the antagonist, the basilisk, will, by seeing things, petrify them and or kill them. And there will be a connection between Harry and the heir to Slytherin maid / Voldemort that is both appropriate on the one hand, but inappropriate on another, and that that people will think there is a connection between him and that he wishes to be just like him, which is false, but there certainly is a connection because he's a Parseltongue and has been affected by him. And I suppose like the last thing just to mention is the mandrakes. That at first they just seem like regular plants, and then you pull them out and they're like little human things that can actually kill you or save you. There's far more to them than what there seems. And I guess I can mention last amplification that the Chamber of Secrets itself is something which is unseen and practically unknown of. So it's perfectly like Voldemort, right? A thing which is unseen, which people don't mention the name of, but is definitely real. It has had a real negative, violent effect on the world. So that would be my sort of beginning amplification about notions of perception and differences between perception and reality.
Yeah, I was interested in the mandrakes. Like, a couple of things about them struck me. The first being that these are seedlings, right?
So perfect,
and
right?
They,
just like our seedlings.
Yeah, right. And they each have to wear their earmuffs when they're working with them. So you can protect yourself by not perceiving certain things, but you got to do so under the circumstances of like understanding what it is that you're not perceiving.
Right, because pure ignorance doesn't help you, but you're right that certain things they are kept ignorant of, right? Like Professor Sprout, I don't want to get too much into 6 because y'all are letting me not yet, but they go now into Terrarium 3, not Terrarium 1. They've never been there. It's not called a terrarium, it's called a greenhouse. There we go. And we recall also that they weren't allowed to go past Fluffy or into the Forbidden Forest in the last text, or to the restricted. I mean, these are all places they end up going anyway, which is funny. But they're not allowed to go into the restricted section as well. But there's good reason why they're kept from each of these places, why they're kept ignorant of these things, which are sort of beyond their level at this point. And so, it's as if it's sort of a discourse on the difference between that which you can't handle but are in a position to be prepared to handle, and that is the best position for an education, versus being wholly ignorant of a circumstance or a threat, not having a clue at all, or something like that. It's my first thought on that.
Yeah, and so the mandrake or mandragora is of course like a really interesting mythological or superstitious sort of reference as well, because I think the belief is basically like, because it's sort of shaped like a person, like a little homunculus or child, it's got these kind of forked. It's a real plant, but so they used to believe that because it looked that way, it would pertain to that kind of principle of the human body or something like that. So it's like it's used as a thing that will help you become fertile, if I'm remembering right, or something like that. And so there's also a play by Machiavelli that's titled Mandrake. I haven't read that one.
I had to read it
Have
in
you guys read it?
college, but I'll be honest, that doesn't mean I read it. No, that's not true. I definitely read it. I remember being confused as to why we were asked to read that and not The Prince. But
I think I broadly remember it referring to. I think the main story, and this is just something I got from my friend Nathaniel Torrey, because I read The Prince, not Mandragora. It's about a seduction
It
of a
is.
man's wife or something.
It's
like
about
that,
it's
right?
about
Yeah.
adultery, and I want to say rape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So
Mhm.
it's a sex
Well,
thing, though, right? Like the mandrake is a sex related plant or superstition related to a plant that happens to look sort of like
Mhm.
the
interesting.
legs of a
Yeah.
human or something like. So the way that she adapts that to something that's like appropriate and interesting for her world, I find really cool. And it's like you take that metaphorical thing and you remove it one further level, right? Like you make it literal, sort of. It's like a baby that's under the dirt. When you pull up the baby, its screams can kill you. Once it starts to mature, it's more likely to do so. So it's like this sexuality thing being adapted for the purposes of this story, in a sort of interesting, funny way. But you can tell that
I
it's like
see where you're coming from. So you're suggesting that the mandrake itself is a symbol for the natural coming to wakefulness of the nascent sexuality of Harry and Ron and Hermione, and that this is the first. Just as the mandrake is growing into what it will be, so will they grow into what they will be, which more and more will involve the attentions and the lack of attention and the one of attention of the opposite number, which has also been suggested by Ginny being called the girlfriend of Harry already, right? And that's so interesting that it's sort of like the creature that represents sexuality, which is budding, is a representation of the budding sexuality of the creatures we're following in the text, which are the humans, Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
I think so. It's pretty convoluted, but
that
yeah, something
strikes
like
me
that.
as very. I mean, just symbolically speaking, that sounds very strong. Just one other instance about the mandragora or the mandrake that I don't know will help. I mean, two things about it is it comes from the word man and the word dragon, mandragon, sort of thing, which is very interesting. A drake is also a dragon. It comes from the word Draco, just like Draco's name, suggesting also that there's something maybe growing in Draco as well if we take a linguistic idea there. But in Pan's Labyrinth, a mandrake is given by Pan the Faun to the main character named Ophelia. I'm sure y'all will appreciate that. And she places the mandrake, which is described as a plant which wanted to be a man, and it looks very humanish. It's placed in a container that has milk and blood that Ophelia has to give her own blood to it to sustain it. And it's placed underneath her mother's bed, who's very sick while she's pregnant, and it keeps her healthy until it's found and disposed of, and her mother's health goes down. So in that story, it's sort of gotten an alexipharmic effect, just like it does in this one, but it's different from the one that it has. Whereas it will keep people or take petrification away from people. In this one, it sort of just has a general salubrious effect in that one. But I think the general principle that holds is that which can harm you can also help you. Yeah. The mandrakes are very weird. Yeah, and they're just kind of buried in there in the beginning for us to notice that they'll have an effect. It again made me think of our friend. I'm forgetting his name. Not Nabokov, but the other Russian who told us with narrative economy that which we see if we see arrive. Yes, Chekhov. Oh gosh, Anton. I was just forgetting his name. If we see a shotgun on the mantle in the first act, it better be shot by the third act.
Right.
And,
I think to the like what you guys are circling around with this idea of the mandrake and its mythological / biological properties, or at least by way of superstition. I think it's interesting that again, I've read ahead, but Hermione is absent for quite some time in this story. And it's just the boys. The boys are the ones who fly. The boys are the ones who get detention. The boys are the ones, and it's funny because there were moments in
the first one with Hermione getting detention with Harry,
and Ron was in the medical ward, right, with Madame Pomfrey in book 1, but in I mean, it just, I think if we also see like something as perhaps awakening in Draco, and when there's also like the what is Percy doing all alone up in his bedroom, and there's all, and then like Harry noticing Ginny, there are all these like references to like nascent romantic inklings or sexual desire, or even just like dating,
Power.
just like that. But I think it's funny because they're still 12, and I mean, like, I don't know about you guys, I don't know what your memory is of your 12-year-old years, but like that was just plain awkward when you have the beginning, when like the beginning of that stuff happens, and then like later we'll see Draco and Harry duel. And I mean, let's be honest, even in Shakespeare's day, like dueling with swords was just it was just like a measuring contest. Like the like it was a way for one.
It is literally a competition for status to get access to ladies.
To get the woman, right? I mean, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a way for a man to express dominance and prowess in front of a woman over another man, right? Like, so, so I think also keeping in mind that our villain for this book is going to be a 16-year-old. Like, there's something about adolescence that's adolescents are drawn to like adolescent. I mean, and I say this having spent the last 8 years teaching adolescent boys, like that, the idea that they walk into the Gryffindor common room and get an uproar of applause, like no detention is gonna change their behavior. The thing that really will change Harry's behavior is the burning shame he feels at the knowledge that Mr. Weasley might lose his job because of what he did. But like, it's just I see adolescence in this one so much more than youth. Like a lot Things
are awkward and things aren't working right.
Yes,
and, I think Ron's Wand is a perfect example of that. You're totally right. Nothing is working out how they think it should.
Right.
Like, and I think that's another great element of returning to this world, right? We have this sense of security that now we understand the world after one whole book there, or even just half a book there, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes forever to get there. It takes 77 pages for us to get like near Hogwarts in this one out of 341, at least in this American version. And so that's so interesting because they're also just like sophomores in that way, right?
Yeah.
I teach sophomores, and sophomores who are the meanest people on a high school campus, always sophomores. Why? Because they were just the freshmen and everybody looked down on them, and now they wield some amount of social status above somebody. And what do? Become tyrants. And so they misperceive their own their own rank in the hierarchy, right? Because they're still, of course, juniors and seniors are above them. And so yeah, that's very interesting that like we're getting this sort of second year, those two elements that you don't know everything even though you think you did because you've done it once, sort of like reading a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know everything about this book even though we both read it, or we've all read them multiple times. And then B, everything is changing, and that's something that you need to understand, that even when you think you understand something and think it's stationary, the situation is always mutable.
Which is why when they go into their first herbology lesson and she takes them to Greenhouse 3 and everybody is all aghast, like, oh my God, they've only ever been in Greenhouse 1. And that's where all the dangerous stuff was. Like, it's a chance for them to maybe learn, maybe through the hard way, maybe that like, hey, like there are higher stakes here. If you don't have the earmuffs on, you could die, right? Like, and so for them,
as Neville helps us out with,
oh Neville, but like they can still, as students, as sophomores. I mean, I've taught sophomores for 8 years, and like they just have no awe. Like there's no level of wonder in them. Like, I've been here. I know the rules. I know how it goes. I got this. Watch me as I fall. Right? Like and that can only be treated by providing them with a circumstance that forces them to see themselves as, oh wow, I'm a little out of my depth. Right?
Right. They're seeing themselves relative to the freshmen, whereas you still see them as You're just 15 now. You were just 14.
Which I think,
You see them yeah.
he goes in the flu. I mean, he's not really super confident about using the flu powder, but like everybody else seems to think he's got it, and he gets to some place that he's like a little bit out of his depth, right? And he figures it out, but not really because he's greatly skilled, just because he knows how to like run away, right?
Hide, yeah,
and
like
hide,
a kid.
yeah, and hide like a kid. But I think that there's something in that like that. Yeah, they all seem kind of sophomoric and.
And Hagrid, like you said, has to come help him. A father or an adult figure still has to come help him. Like that's a good reason for him to stay humble, even though he will be portrayed as sort of an epic hero at the end of the text. He still has sort of a father figure come grab him by the scruff and get him out of a nervous situation next to a creepy witch with some fingers.
But oddly, like unlike your classic epic heroes, he's really not interested in being given all of this attention, and like he doesn't want to be the center of attention, and every time he is the center of attention, he's afraid of getting in trouble, like I think that's not something we saw as much in this reading. We can explore that a little bit next time, that like Harry's relationship to fame versus Lockhart's relationship to fame. Maybe
I definitely want to get into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But next time, because I do have to go pretty soon here. Okay. So yeah. Okay, and you've been traveling all day, and I have the least excuse of anybody to need to go. But so we were talking today about things we would forget at Hogwarts, and maybe we can end with this. And so we have our few characters. We have Fred and George, who respectively leave there. I'm already forgetting what they left. I know that Jenny leaves her diary.
Fred leaves his broomstick. And George leaves his fireworks, right?
And George leaves his fireworks. Very good. So of those three things, Wes, what would you leave by accident?
I think fireworks.
Why fireworks? Yeah.
If I were them, I would be really, really pumped about using the fireworks. And if I were me, I would be terrified of using the fireworks. So I thought, be on the safe side either way. Don't bring the fireworks. So subconscious, I would not want.
That's very good. Very good. You'd be conflicted against yourself and have to force yourself into forgetting. Very, very Freudian. Very good. How about you, Sarah?
Is this like if I were moving and leaving for school, what would I be most likely to forget?
Yeah, and I guess also by proxy, therefore, most likely to take.
Interesting. I think I would probably be most likely to forget my broomstick. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, that's not true, because I would put a lot of emphasis on packing my broomstick, because I think I would really like that. I like sports. I think the idea of flying a game that involves flying sounds awesome. I think I would be most likely to forget my fireworks, but for probably the exact opposite reason as Wes, that like I don't care. Like, I mean, I'm not really like a practical.
Indifferent towards fireworks?
No. Oh no,
really?
I love it when other people have fireworks. I love watching fireworks. I actually find fireworks to be terrifying to like have near in my possession.
Course,
but it would be thoroughly out of my character to pack them in the first place. So
very good. All right.
Yeah. What would you forget?
So I'd never forget the fireworks, because I'm going to light it up wherever I go. I wouldn't be bringing a diary, because I'm not an 11-year-old girl. And and I would most likely forget my Quidditch broom, because I would think it was so obvious that I couldn't possibly forget it. That I would almost certainly forget it. And I would see it as such a part of me and my experience, that even if I did forget it, I would be sure that it would be sent to me, so that I would be almost careless about it. And just something funny, because I know you've been wanting us to share quotes lately, Sarah. So I'm going to pull a real Harry and Ron here. On page 93, there's just something funny, and this has almost no relation to anything. But I just thought it was, again, one of those clever little things. So remember, Professor Sprout was hanging out with Gilderoy Lockhart, and she seemed to be disgruntled, not her usual happy self. And then he takes another liberty with her, taking her student out of class before she agreed. And then it's just very interesting because, physically speaking, she gave a sharp slap to a spiky, dark red plant as she spoke, making it draw on the long feelers that had been inching sneakily over her shoulder. And that just makes me suggest or think cleverly that that's supposed to be a physical metaphor for the negative or dark thoughts that are forming in her head about Gilderoy Lockhart. That she's showing that she's aware of that happening, that that's like an excellent educator, and that that's one of the tremendous aspects of an excellent educator, that they're aware when negative emotion or a negative perception of one of their colleagues or students is encroaching on their judgment, and that they can address that. And I just thought, even though that was small, it was profound, because it showed that she's aware of things that normal people are not aware of as well, because it was sneaking up on her, but she is not to be snuck up on. And we'd seen something similarly with Dumbledore when he was speaking to Harry and Ron, that even though Harry sort of left out a detail that it was Ron's father's car, that he knew that Dumbledore would see through that he would know. He's omniscient still. So I really liked that part. And I wanted to show you that I have been listening when you've asked us to do that sort of thing as well. Got to give Hermione her due. She is the one that aces all the tests, after all. All right. Well, yeah. It kind of sounded like you wanted to say one quick thing about that, Wes. If you did, we probably have one more minute.
I thought I like the contrast between Sprout and Lockhart. You know, like his classroom where he has them do a test for half an hour on him, and then brings out some pixies and just releases them with no instruction whatsoever. That's great.
That was like my first year
total
teaching. Okay, debate. And that really does strike me as what a bad teacher has to teach, right? They just teach about themselves because they become like a cult of personality. And then whenever you're given a task, they don't prepare you for it at all. And that's definitely my first year of teaching, maybe my second as well. Some of the seeds were grown out of, it seems, or maybe have been trimmed. There we go. Some of the poor parts of the plant. All right. Well, any last thoughts, or till next time? 6, 7, 8, y'all. Does that sound?
Till next time, yeah. 6, 7, and 8. Well, we sort of, let's 6, 7, 8. Right. We sort of tackled a little bit of 6, but 6, 7, and 8 is good.
Okay, so then we get the Death Day party, which is excellent, and then we actually get Mudbloods and Murmurs. And if we want to add another one as we go along, we can leave a message on the Facebook page if we want to add another chapter or something like that.
Cool. Right on. Well, I'll keep you posted when I have some time. It might be in a few days. It might be, it might definitely not in the next couple of days, but sometime early next week.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Maybe, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Cool.
That sounds great.
Take it easy, fellas. Have a good night.
See y'all.
See ya.
No walking willows.
Bye.
See ya.
See ya.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.